The stars belonged to the Vrex. For 1,000 years, they had proven this truth across 73 conquered worlds. Their ships were mountains of metal that blotted out suns. Their warriors stood 9 feet tall, covered in scales that turned away laser fire like raindrops. They healed from wounds that would kill any other creature. They had never lost a war. They had never even struggled in one. Warlord Krevtar stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the small blue planet ahead. Earth, the humans called it. He had reviewed the intelligence reports with something close to boredom. The humans were weak creatures barely reaching 6 feet tall. Their skin was soft. Their bones broke easily. They lived for less than a century, dying before they could gather real wisdom. Their weapons were primitive, their ships slow, their defenses laughable. The conquest would take 3 days at most, perhaps 2. Krevtar had already planned the victory celebration. He sent the standard message. Every species received it: surrender within 1 rotation of their planet, or face complete destruction. In 1,000 years, every species had surrendered. The Vrex had expected nothing less. They were the apex of evolution, the peak of military might, the rightful rulers of the galaxy. On Earth, President Doyen sat in the emergency council chamber deep beneath Sol. The message from the Vrex played again on the screens around him. The translations were clear. Kneel or die. Those were the only choices the Vrex offered. Admiral Hyejin spoke first. She commanded what remained of Earth's space defense fleet, 50 ships against the 300 Virex warships currently entering their solar system. The math was simple and terrible. She showed projections on the main display. If they fought, they would lose. Earth would burn. Billions would die. General Minho disagreed. He was old for a soldier, with gray in his hair and scars on his hands. He had fought in every major conflict for 30 years. He knew what surrender meant. The Vrex did not take prisoners to treat well. They took slaves. They destroyed cultures. They erased entire species from existence when those species no longer proved useful. Dr. Jiwan presented her analysis. She had studied every scrap of information about the Vrex that humanity had gathered over the past century. They were conquerors, yes. They were powerful, yes. But they followed patterns. They had grown comfortable in their dominance. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They had forgotten how to fight an enemy that refused to break. The council argued for 6 hours. Some wanted to surrender and hope for mercy. Others wanted to evacuate, to send colony ships into deep space and preserve some fragment of humanity among the stars. But the numbers were clear there too. They could save perhaps 10 million people, maybe 20 million if they were lucky. Against Earth's 8 billion, it was nothing. Doyen listened to everything. He was a good leader because he understood that some choices had no good options. There was only less terrible and more terrible. Surrender meant slow death. Evacuation meant abandoning most of humanity. Fighting meant almost certain destruction. But it also meant something else. It meant the Vrex would bleed. He called for a vote. The council was divided. 12 wanted surrender, 10 wanted evacuation, 15 wanted to fight. Doyen cast the final vote himself. Earth would resist. When Krevtar received the rejection, he laughed. Actually laughed, a sound like grinding stones. His officers joined in. The humans had chosen death, so be it. He ordered the first attack wave. Orbital bombardment of all military installations. The humans would see their defenses shattered from space, and then they would beg to surrender. The Vrex warships moved into position around Earth, their weapons charged. Energy cannons that could crack continents prepared to fire. This would be over quickly. Then the human ships appeared. They came from behind the moon, from the asteroid belt, from hiding spots among Earth satellites. 50 ships against 300. Captain Sunho commanded the lead fighter squadron. His ship was tiny compared to the Vrex carriers, a mosquito against an elephant. But mosquitoes could bite. The battle began. Vrex weapons tore through human shields like they were nothing. The first 3 human ships exploded in seconds. Krevtar nodded with satisfaction. As expected. As always, but the humans did not run. They did not break formation. They did not beg for mercy. Instead, they attacked with a fury that shocked the Vrex crews. Human pilots flew their ships in ways that made no sense, performing maneuvers that should have torn their vessels apart. They targeted weak points with precision that spoke of careful study. They sacrificed damaged ships by ramming them into Vrex weapons arrays. Sunho saw his opportunity. A Vrex carrier had exposed its engine core while turning to target another human ship. The shields were down for just a moment, a gap in the defenses that would close in seconds. He did not hesitate. He did not think about his wife waiting for him on Earth or his daughter who had just turned 5. He thought only about making the Vrex bleed. His fighter screamed forward at maximum acceleration. Vrex point defense systems tried to stop him, but he was too fast, too determined. He crashed directly into the carrier's reactor core and detonated his ship's power plant. The explosion was visible from Earth. The Vrex carrier, a ship that had conquered 12 worlds, split in half. Atmosphere vented into space. Secondary explosions rippled through both sections. 3,000 Vrex warriors died in an instant. Admiral Hiagin watched from her command ship and felt something like hope. They were losing. The math had not changed, but the Vrex were bleeding now. Sunho had shown them all that the invincible could be hurt. She gave her orders. All ships, full attack. Target their engines, their weapons, anything that looked vulnerable. Make them pay for every inch of space. Make them remember that humans do not die quietly. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it ended, the Vrex controlled Earth's orbit. They had won, but 12 of their warships were destroyed. 18 more were damaged. They had lost more ships in this one battle than in their last 20 conquests combined. Krevthar stared at the casualty reports. 5,000 Vrex warriors dead. Against humans. Against prey. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. It was rage-inducing. He ordered his remaining ships to prepare for ground invasion. He would personally oversee the extermination of these creatures who dared to resist. On Earth, Doyun received the reports of the orbital battle. They had lost 38 ships. 20,000 spacers were dead, but the Vrex had bled. The message went out across all channels to every human on the planet. The enemy could be hurt. The enemy could die. When they came to the surface, Earth would be ready. In orbit, the Vrex prepared their landing craft. 1 million warriors would descend upon the human cities. They would crush this resistance and restore their reputation. They were Vrex. They were unstoppable. But in the wreckage of their destroyed ships and the bodies of their dead floating in space, a new truth was emerging. The unstoppable had met something they had never encountered before. They had met humans who refused to stop. The Vrex landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal rain. 1 million warriors in ships designed to crush resistance before it could begin. They had done this 73 times before. They knew exactly how it would go. The humans would see them coming and panic. Cities would empty. People would flee into the countryside. Then the hunting would begin, but the cities did not empty. The people did not run. Lieutenant Yuna stood in the ruins of downtown Seoul and watched the landing craft settle onto the streets. She was 24 years old and had been in the military for 3 years. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this. The Vrex warriors that emerged from the ships were monsters from nightmares, 9 feet of muscle and scale and barely contained violence. Their weapons could punch through concrete. Their armor turned away bullets like toys, but Yuna had her orders. She had her team, and she had something the Vrex did not expect. She had a plan. The Vrex moved through Seoul in formation, expecting resistance at key buildings. They found nothing. Empty streets, abandoned vehicles, silence. Commander Thexril led the main force. He had conquered 8 worlds personally. This silence bothered him. Prey should run or fight. They should not simply disappear. Then the streets exploded. Yuna's team had spent 2 weeks planting explosives in the subway tunnels beneath the main roads. When the Vrex reached the kill zone, she triggered them all. 50 tons of concrete and steel collapsed into the underground. The Vrex warriors fell into the darkness, their heavy bodies crashing through level after level of subway tunnel. Those that survived the fall found themselves in tight spaces, where their size became a disadvantage. Yuna's soldiers were waiting in the tunnels with close-range weapons. Shotguns loaded with armor-piercing rounds, grenades designed to work in confined spaces. The Vrex could regenerate from wounds, but regeneration took time. Time the humans did not give them. The battle in the tunnels lasted 3 hours. When it ended, Yuna had lost 18 soldiers, but she had killed 63 Vrex warriors. The math was terrible for her side, but that did not matter. What mattered was the Vrex blood staining the subway walls. What mattered was proof that the monsters could die. Across Earth, similar scenes played out. In New Delhi, human fighters lured Vrex forces into narrow alleys and dropped buildings on them. In Cairo, they used the desert heat and sandstorms to disorient enemy troops before attacking. In São Paulo, they turned the dense favelas into a maze where every corner held an ambush. The Vrex were winning. They controlled most major cities within a week, but they were bleeding in ways they had never bled before. Every street cost them warriors. Every building claimed lives. The humans fought with a desperation that bordered on insanity. They laid traps that killed themselves just to take a few Vrex with them. They refused to surrender even when surrounded. They died standing up. General Minho coordinated the defense from a mobile command center that moved every 6 hours. He studied the battle reports and saw the pattern. The Vrex were predictable. They had fought so many weaker enemies that they had forgotten how to adapt. They followed doctrine even when doctrine got them killed. They expected fear, and when they found fury instead, they did not know how to respond. Dr. Jiwan worked in a bunker laboratory with a team of scientists racing against time. The Vrex had deployed a bioweapon in Beijing, a virus designed to target human DNA. It had killed 2 million people in 3 days. The Vrex probably thought it was a mercy, a quick end to the resistance. Jiwan thought it was an opportunity. She studied the virus day and night, pushing herself beyond exhaustion. The virus was sophisticated, tailored to human biology with precision that spoke of centuries of genetic research. But the Vrex had made a mistake. They had made it too specific. And anything that specific could be modified. Dr. Youngmi, a microbiologist who had been studying alien diseases for a decade, made the breakthrough. The virus attacked DNA replication. If they could reverse the targeting mechanism, if they could make it attack Vrex DNA instead of human DNA, they could turn the weapon back on its creators. It took them 4 weeks. 4 weeks of working with samples from dead Vrex warriors. 4 weeks of testing on Vrex tissue cultures. 4 weeks of trial and error and failure and trying again. Finally, they had it. A modified virus that attacked the very regeneration ability that made the Vrex so dangerous. They deployed it in the water supply of territories the Vrex controlled. Within days, Vrex warriors began falling ill. Their wounds stopped healing. Simple injuries became fatal. The invincible were vulnerable. Commander Thexral reported to Warlord Krevthar with words he had never spoken before. They were losing warriors faster than they could replace them. The humans were not fighting to hold territory. They were fighting to kill. Every human soldier seemed willing to trade their life for a Vrex warrior's life, and they were making the trade over and over again. Krevthar executed 3 of his commanders for incompetence. He refused to believe that humans could legitimately challenge Vrex might. This was merely a temporary setback. Once they deployed their full forces, once they stopped holding back, the humans would break like every other species had broken. He ordered total war. No more restraint. No more mercy. Exterminate the humans down to the last child. Turn their cities to ash. Make an example of Earth that would echo through the galaxy for 10,000 years. But in his private chambers, Krevthar looked at the casualty reports and felt something he had not felt in 50 years of conquest. Doubt. The Vrex had lost 30,000 warriors in 6 months of fighting. More than they had lost in the previous century of expansion. And the humans were still fighting. On Earth, President Doyen addressed the survivors from a hidden bunker. 2 billion humans were dead. Entire cities were gone. The Vrex controlled most of the planet's surface. By every military metric, Earth had lost, but Doyen spoke about victory anyway. Not victory in holding ground or saving cities. Victory in making the Vrex pay for every inch. Victory in proving that humans could not be conquered without cost. Victory in showing the galaxy that some species would rather burn than kneel. Lieutenant Yuna, now promoted to captain after her actions in Seoul, listened to the broadcast from a bunker in the Himalayas. She was thin from rationing, exhausted from months of constant fighting and missing 3 fingers from her left hand courtesy of a Vrex plasma weapon. She should have felt defeated. She should have felt hopeless. Instead, she felt angry. The kind of anger that burned cold and steady that did not fade with time or hardship. The Vrex wanted to exterminate humanity. Fine. Humanity would make them choke on it. She gathered her remaining soldiers, 40 men and women who had survived when thousands had died. She showed them the maps of Vrex positions. She explained her plan for the next attack. It was suicidal. It would probably kill them all. But it would also kill Vrex warriors, and that was enough. They voted to proceed. Unanimous. In orbit above Earth, the Vrex fleet prepared for the final assault. Krevthar would lead it personally. He would crush the last human strongholds and restore Vrex honor. The humans had fought well for primitives. They had made this conquest more difficult than expected, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Vrex were superior. The Vrex were unstoppable. On the surface, in tunnels and bunkers and hidden bases, humanity prepared to prove them wrong one more time. The war had been raging for 6 months and Earth was dying. Entire continents were scarred with craters from orbital bombardment. The oceans glowed with radiation in places where Vrex weapons had struck. 2 billion humans were dead, their bodies buried in mass graves or simply left to rot where they fell. The Vrex controlled 70% of the planet's surface, but they were bleeding. God, how they were bleeding. Commander Tae-Jin stood in the Australian outback and looked at his prize, a Vrex supply depot, captured after 3 days of fighting that had cost him half his forces. The depot was small by Vrex standards, just a staging area for their push into the southern hemisphere. But it contained something valuable. Prisoners dogged 12 Vrex warriors captured alive when Tae-Jin's forces had collapsed the depot's main bunker. The Vrex did not surrender easily. These 12 had fought until their weapons were empty and their armor broken. They sat now in a makeshift prison, glaring at their human captors with contempt that needed no translation. Tae-Jin could have killed them. Should have killed them by any reasonable military logic. Prisoners were a liability. They consumed resources. They posed security risks. And these were Vrex, the same creatures who had slaughtered billions of humans without mercy. But Tae-Jin did not kill them. Instead, he studied them. He spent weeks learning their language from audio files captured from Vrex communications. He interviewed the prisoners through translators, asking them about their culture, their military structure, their beliefs. Most refused to speak. But some, worn down by captivity and the shock of defeat, talked. What Tae-Jin learned changed everything. The Vrex were not just physically superior. They were psychologically inflexible. They had conquered so many weaker species that they had forgotten how to fight equals. Their military doctrine was 1,000 years old, unchanged because it had never needed to change. They viewed war as a process, conquest as inevitable. The idea of losing was so foreign to them that they had no strategies for dealing with it. More importantly, they were arrogant. Profoundly, fatally arrogant. They believed themselves apex predators in a galaxy of prey. When prey fought back, when prey drew blood, it offended them on a level deeper than reason. It made them angry, and anger made them sloppy. Tae-Jin took this information and weaponized it. He hacked into Vrex communication networks using captured equipment. Then he began broadcasting. Every day for hours he read names. The names of Vrex warriors killed by human hands. Thousands of names gathered from battle reports and prisoner interrogations. He read them in perfect Vrex tongue slowly and clearly so there could be no mistake. Warrior Thexakran killed in Seoul. Warrior Vraxtal killed in Mumbai. Commander Krevnax killed in Cairo, on day after day. A litany of the fallen spoken by the prey they had come to exterminate. The psychological impact was devastating. Vrex warriors began reporting to medical bays with stress symptoms. Some refused to fight, claiming illness. Others fought with reckless fury, abandoning tactics in favor of rage. Their command structure fractured as officers blamed each other for the mounting casualties. Krevthar ordered the broadcasts jammed, but Tae-Jin had distributed his transmitters across the planet. Destroying one meant 3 more appeared. The names kept coming. The dead kept speaking through human mouths. In orbit, Admiral Heejin commanded what remained of Earth's fleet. 30 ships out of the original 50. 30 ships against the 200 Vrex warships that still blockaded the planet. The math was impossible. Victory was a dream. But Heejin had stopped fighting for victory months ago. Now she fought to make the Vrex pay. She studied their fleet patterns and found weaknesses. The Vrex kept their ships in tight formations, relying on overlapping shields and firepower, strong against conventional attacks, vulnerable to unconventional ones. She ordered her ships to load nuclear warheads into cargo containers and launch them into space, thousands of containers drifting on ballistic trajectories toward the Vrex fleet. The Vrex ignored them, focusing on the human ships that posed actual threats. When the containers reached optimal range, they detonated. The nuclear explosions in space created electromagnetic pulses that scrambled Vrex sensors. In that moment of blindness, Heejin's ships attacked. They used missiles, railguns, and old-fashioned kinetic weapons that the Vrex shields were not optimized to stop. They rammed damaged ships into Vrex carriers, using their reactors as bombs. The battle near Mars lasted 14 hours. It was chaos and carnage on a scale that made the first engagement look small. Human ships died by the dozen, but Vrex ships died too. Massive warships that had survived 100 battles met their end against human desperation. When it was over, Hyegen had 8 ships left, but the Vrex had lost 60. Their blockade was broken. Supply ships from Earth's hidden bases could reach orbit again. The resistance could continue. Hyegen sat in her damaged command ship and wrote letters to the families of the dead. 22,000 spacers had died under her command in that one battle. She wrote to them all, or tried to, until exhaustion claimed her and she fell asleep at her desk. On the surface, Dr. Jiwan made another breakthrough. She had been studying Vrex shield technology from captured equipment. The shields operated on a specific frequency, optimized against energy weapons like lasers and plasma cannons. They were nearly impenetrable to modern military technology, but they were weak against older weapons. Kinetic energy, explosives, projectile weapons like bullets and rockets. The Vrex had optimized their defenses against the threats they commonly faced, never imagining they would fight an enemy primitive enough to still use gunpowder. Jiwan brought her findings to General Minho. Within days, Earth's remaining factories were retooling. They stopped trying to build advanced energy weapons that the Vrex shields could stop. Instead, they built rifles, machine guns, rocket launchers, artillery, weapons that would have been obsolete in any other war. But against the Vrex, they were perfect. The next time human forces engaged Vrex ground troops, the results shocked both sides. Bullets that should have been stopped by advanced armor punched through shields and found flesh. Rockets designed in the 20th century destroyed 25th century war machines. The Vrex fell back in confusion, unable to understand how primitive weapons were killing them. General Minho coordinated a series of attacks across multiple continents using the new weapons. The Vrex were forced to adapt to modify their shield frequencies to change tactics. For the first time in their history, they were reacting instead of acting. They were responding to threats instead of imposing their will. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, but it was fundamental. The Vrex were no longer the apex predators setting the terms of battle. They were participants in a war they might actually lose. On the Vrex homeworld, half a galaxy away, the High Council convened an emergency session. Reports from Earth painted a picture that seemed impossible. A single world had cost them more warriors than the last 10 conquests combined. The fleet was depleted. Replacement forces were months away. And most disturbing of all, other species in the Empire were watching. If the Vrex could be bled by humans, what did that mean for Vrex invincibility? If one species could resist, might others try? The Empire that had stood for 1,000 years suddenly seemed fragile. Voices in the Council called for withdrawal, cut their losses, abandon Earth and reinforce their existing territories. But Warlord Krevthar would not hear it. He had staked his reputation, his honor on conquering Earth. He would not be the first Vrex commander to fail in 1,000 years. He would not be remembered as the one who let prey escape. He demanded total commitment. Every remaining ship in the sector, every available warrior. He would personally lead the final assault on humanity's last stronghold in the Himalayas. He would crush this resistance and execute every human leader himself. The High Council reluctantly agreed. They would send reinforcements. But if Krevthar failed, if he could not break the humans even with overwhelming force, he would be recalled in disgrace. And Earth would be offered terms. Actual terms, not just demands for surrender. The message was clear. This was Krevthar's last chance to prove that the Vrex were still unstoppable. On Earth, in the deep bunkers beneath the Himalayas, General Minho received intelligence about the coming assault. 300,000 Vrex warriors. Orbital bombardment on a scale that would turn mountains to glass. It was the end, the final battle. He gathered his commanders and showed them the numbers. They had maybe 50,000 soldiers left, untrained civilians with guns, children, old people. Everyone who could hold a weapon. Against the Vrex veteran warriors, it was suicide. The commanders voted to fight anyway. Unanimous, because that was what humans did. They fought when fighting was hopeless. They stood when standing was death. They bled the monsters who thought themselves gods, and they died knowing that their deaths mattered. The Vreks were coming. Earth was ready. The Himalayas had become humanity's final fortress. 300 million people, all that remained of Earth's billions, huddled in a network of bunkers and tunnels carved into the ancient mountains. Soldiers and civilians together, armed with whatever weapons they could carry, waiting for the end to come from the sky. Warlord Krevthar brought his entire remaining armada to bear. 200 warships filled the sky above the mountains, blotting out the sun. He stood on his flagship's bridge and looked down at the human stronghold with satisfaction. This was how it should be. The prey cornered. The hunter moving in for the kill. After months of frustration, of losses that stung his pride, he would finally crush these irritating creatures. He gave the order. Orbital bombardment. Maximum yield. The sky turned white with energy. Weapons designed to crack continents focused on a single mountain range. Peaks that had stood for millions of years melted like wax. Glaciers vaporized. The rock itself turned to glass under the incredible heat. General Minho watched from a command center 3 miles underground. The bunkers shook like earthquakes were tearing the world apart. Screens showed the surface being reduced to molten slag. Emergency alerts screamed as outer tunnels collapsed. Thousands of people died in the first hour of bombardment, crushed or burned or simply erased. But the deeper tunnels held. Human engineers had been preparing for this for months, reinforcing the natural cave systems, creating redundancies, planning for the worst. The mountains were dying, but humanity's last defenders survived. After 3 days of bombardment, Krevthar stopped. He wanted prisoners. He wanted to parade human leaders before the High Council. He wanted to prove that the Vreks were still supreme. Dead humans could not surrender. He ordered the ground assault. 300,000 Vreks warriors descended in landing craft. They would dig the humans out of their holes and drag them into the light. It would be glorious. It was hell. The Vreks entered the tunnel systems expecting frightened refugees. Instead, they found prepared defensive positions. Every tunnel was a kill zone. Every chamber was trapped. The humans had turned the mountains into a weapon. Sergeant Bowman held a critical tunnel entrance with her platoon. 40 soldiers against waves of Vreks warriors. She was 26 years old, had been in the army for 4 years, and had already killed more Vreks than she could count. Today she would kill more. The Vreks came in force, confident in their armor and strength. Bowman's team hit them with massed rifle fire from prepared positions. The bullets, primitive by galactic standards, punched through Vreks shields and armor. Warriors fell, and those behind them kept coming, climbing over their own dead. Bowman's ammunition ran out after 6 hours. She drew her combat knife and planted explosives at her position. When the Vreks overran her defenses, she detonated everything. The tunnel collapsed, killing her and 47 Vreks warriors in an instant. Across the tunnel network, similar scenes played out. Human soldiers fought until their ammunition was gone, then fought with knives and grenades in their bare hands. They died by the thousands. But they took Vreks warriors with them, and every Vreks death made the next one easier. The battles in the tunnels were brutal beyond description. Tight spaces, close quarters, no room for tactics or maneuvering, just violence in the dark, humans and Vreks killing each other in ways that would have horrified civilized species. Commander Thexeral led his forces deeper into the tunnel systems, following maps that proved useless. The humans had modified the tunnels, created false passages, set traps that killed squads at a time. He lost 100 warriors to a simple pit trap filled with explosives, another 50 to a tunnel that flooded with poison gas. He reported to Krevthar that the assault was proceeding, but slower than expected. The humans were not fleeing. They were fighting for every meter. It was madness. They could not win. The math was against them, but they kept fighting anyway. In the deepest bunker, thousands of human children were sheltered. They ranged from infants to teenagers, cared for by medical staff and teachers trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while the world ended above them. They were supposed to be safe here, protected while the soldiers fought and died. Then Vreks forces breached the outer defenses. Jihai was 16 years old. Her mother was Admiral Hyegen, somewhere in orbit commanding the remains of Earth's fleet. Her father had died in the first month of the war. She had been living in this bunker for 6 months, helping care for younger children, trying not to think about the fact that she would probably die here. When the alarm sounded, when the reports came that Vreks warriors were in the tunnels heading toward the children's bunker, She made a choice. She gathered other teenagers, 24 boys and girls who were tired of waiting to die. They broke into the experimental weapons lab, a section of the bunker that had been sealed off. Inside, they found prototype weapons untested and dangerous. The most promising was a drone swarm system. Thousands of micro-drones with shaped charges, controlled by an AI that had never been field-tested. The adults tried to stop them. Too risky. Too unstable. The AI might go rogue. The drones might malfunction. There were 100 reasons not to do this. Jihai activated the system anyway. 10,000 drones, each the size of a fist, swarmed out of the lab and into the tunnels. The AI analyzed the environment instantly, identified Vrex warriors by their thermal signatures and size, and attacked with machine precision. The Vrex had no defense against this. Their shields stopped energy weapons and bullets. But these tiny drones flew through gaps in their armor and detonated against vulnerable points. Neck joints, eye slits, weapon feeds. They attacked in coordinated swarms, 50 drones focusing on a single warrior, exploiting every weakness Dr. Jawan's research had identified. The Vrex lines collapsed into chaos. Warriors swatted at drones like insects, but there were too many. The shaped charges were small individually, but cumulative damage added up. Armor cracked. Shields failed. The invincible Vrex warriors fell to weapons built by teenagers in a desperate last stand. Thexrel retreated with his surviving forces, leaving hundreds of dead behind. He reported to Krevthar that the assault was stalled. The humans had deployed new weapons. They needed reinforcements. Krevthar's rage was a physical force. He had brought 300,000 warriors. He had bombarded the mountains until they glowed. He had personally overseen every aspect of this assault. And still the humans resisted. Still they fought. Still they killed his warriors. He made a decision born of fury and wounded pride. He would issue a personal challenge. He would face humanity's strongest warrior in single combat. When he won, as he surely would, the humans would surrender. They would see their champion broken and lose all hope. General Minho received the challenge and laughed. It was a bitter sound, hollow in the command center. The Vrex warlord wanted single combat. Fine. Minho was old, tired, and had been ready to die for months. If his death could buy time, could save a few more people, it was worth it. He accepted the challenge. They met in a cavern that had once been beautiful, full of crystal formations and underground streams. The bombardment had shattered the crystals and boiled away the water. Now it was just stone and blood. Krevthar stood 9 feet tall, covered in armor that had survived 100 battles. He carried weapons that could level buildings. He had killed champions from a dozen species. This human, this old man with gray hair and scarred hands, should have been beneath his notice. Minho stood 6 feet tall and carried a rifle, a knife, and a belt of grenades. He was 53 years old and every joint ached. But his eyes were steady as he faced the warlord. The fight began. It was not a fair fight. It was not meant to be. Krevthar's first blow broke Minho's ribs. The second tore off his left arm at the shoulder. The Vrex warlord was toying with him, drawing out the suffering, proving his superiority, but Minho did not fall. He used the pain to focus. He knew he would die here. The only question was whether his death would matter. He planted grenades on the chamber floor, lured Krevthar over them, detonated them. The explosions shattered the warlord's leg armor. Krevthar regenerated. Of course he did. Minho expected that. He drew his knife with his remaining hand and went for the eyes. Not to kill, but to hurt, to scar, to mark the invincible with permanent wounds. The fight lasted 6 hours. It was broadcast on all frequencies, humans and Vrex alike watching their champions battle. Minho lost his legs when Krevthar crushed them. He lost fingers. He lost blood until he should have been dead from shock alone. But he kept fighting. He dragged himself forward with his one remaining arm, planting explosives in cracks in the warlord's armor, using every dirty trick he knew. When Krevthar tried to gloat, to demand surrender, Minho spat blood in his face and kept fighting annihilantly. Bleeding out, vision fading, Minho saw his opportunity. Krevthar's chest armor had cracked from repeated explosions. The warlord's triple hearts were exposed for just a moment. Minho had 1 grenade left. He pulled the pin with his teeth and threw himself at the warlord. They fell together, Minho's dying body wrapping around Krevthar's torso. The grenade detonated at point-blank range. General Minho died instantly. Warlord Krevthar, the invincible conqueror of 73 worlds, bled out on the cavern floor with shrapnel in his hearts. His last thought was disbelief. He could not lose to prey. The silence after Warlord Krevthar's death was deafening. For 3 days, the Vrex fleet in orbit did nothing. No bombardment. No communications. No attacks. They simply hung there in space, their massive warships dark and quiet. As if the entire species had stopped to process the impossible. Their invincible warlord was dead, killed by a human, by prey. The foundation of Vrex identity, their absolute certainty in their own supremacy, had cracked. Commander Thexral stood in the flagship's command center and stared at the casualty reports. They had lost 90,000 warriors in the assault on the Himalayas. 90,000 out of 300,000. The remaining forces were scattered, demoralized, fighting an enemy they no longer understood. Half the Vrex commanders wanted revenge. They wanted to glass Earth until nothing remained, to erase this humiliation from existence. The other half wanted to withdraw, to cut their losses and return home before more warriors died. The debate raged for 3 days while humans waited in their bunkers, expecting another assault that never came. On the Vrex homeworld, the High Council faced a crisis that threatened the Empire's very existence. News of Krevthar's death had spread across their territory. Species they had conquered decades ago were whispering about rebellion. Vrex outposts were reporting unrest. The myth of invincibility was shattered. And without that myth, what held the Empire together? The Council had 3 choices. Send massive reinforcements to Earth and crush the humans no matter the cost. Withdraw from Earth and try to contain the damage to Vrex's reputation, or unthinkably negotiate. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Vrex chose to negotiate. On Earth, President Doyen had died 3 weeks earlier from radiation poisoning. Dr. Jiwan had assumed leadership of what remained of humanity. She was a scientist, not a politician, and she led a species on the brink of extinction. 400 million humans survived out of 8 billion. Earth was a burned husk. But they had survived. They had fought the Vrex to a standstill. They had made the invincible bleed. When 3 Vrex ships returned to Earth under a white flag, a symbol they had learned from human customs, Jiwan almost ordered them destroyed. It would be easy. The Vrex fleet was scattered and confused. Earth's remaining weapons could kill those 3 ships, but she was tired of killing. Tired of war. Tired of watching humans die. So she agreed to meet. The meeting took place in a bunker in what used to be Switzerland. Vrex Ambassador Thalrex entered surrounded by guards, his scaled body tense with barely concealed hostility. He stood across a table from Jiwan and her advisors, and for a long moment neither side spoke. Then Thalrex said the words that had never been uttered in Vrex history. "We underestimated you. It was not an apology." The Vrex did not apologize, but it was an admission, and that was almost as shocking. The negotiations took 6 weeks. The Vrex would withdraw from the Sol system completely. They would pay reparations in technology and resources to help rebuild Earth. They would officially recognize human sovereignty and establish borders that neither side would cross. In exchange, humans would not pursue revenge into Vrex territory. They would not share their military tactics with other species under Vrex control. They would not actively encourage rebellion in the Vrex Empire. It was not a peace treaty between equals. The Vrex still held overwhelming military superiority. They could send another fleet 10 times larger and crush Earth through sheer numbers. But they would not. Because the cost would be too high. Because the humans had proven they would make the Vrex bleed for every planet, every city, every life. Admiral Heejin watched the Vrex fleet depart from her battered command ship. Only 3 of her original vessels remained operational. She had lost so many people, so many good soldiers, but Earth was free. Scarred, broken, burning, but free. She thought about Captain Sunho, who had rammed his fighter into a Vrex carrier in the first battle. About General Minho, who had died fighting a warlord. About Sergeant Bowman, who had held a tunnel until it became her tomb. About all the others whose names filled memorial walls that stretched for miles. They had won. Not through superior technology or numbers or strategy. They had won through sheer refusal to stop fighting. The galaxy would remember that. 20 years passed. Earth rebuilt slowly. Vrex technology from the reparations helped, but humans were careful not to become dependent on it. They developed their own innovations, their own ships, their own weapons. They remembered what relying on other superiority had cost them. Commander Taijin was 73 years old now, gray and weathered. He visited the memorial wall in New Seoul every year on the anniversary of the war's end. The wall stretched for 30 miles, inscribed with 8 billion names, the dead of Earth remembered forever. His granddaughter Yuna walked beside him. She was 20, had never known the war, and sometimes Taijin envied her that innocence. But she needed to understand. She needed to know what her species had endured. "Did we really beat them, grandfather?" she asked, looking at the endless names carved in stone. Taijin was quiet for a long moment, remembering tunnels filled with blood, ships exploding in orbit, cities turned to ash. "We didn't beat them, Yuna, we made them bleed. We made them doubt. We showed the galaxy that humans can't be conquered because we would rather die standing than live kneeling. But so many died," Yuna said softly. "Yes. And we remember them. Every single one. That's what makes us different from the Vrex. They forget they're dead. We honor ours." Across the galaxy, the Vrex Empire was changing. The war with Earth had exposed fundamental weaknesses. 3 species had rebelled in the past 2 decades, inspired by humanity's resistance. The Vrex crushed 2 of the rebellions, but at costs that strained their military. The 3rd rebellion succeeded, establishing an independent world on the Vrex border. The empire was shrinking. Not collapsing, but contracting. The Vrex were learning to be something other than conquerors. It was a slow, painful process for a culture built on dominance. But they were adapting because they had to. Ambassador Thalrex, now aged and approaching the end of his long life, sometimes thought about the war. He had seen the battlefield recordings. He had watched human soldiers fight with a desperation that bordered on insanity. He had seen them die standing up, refusing to kneel even when kneeling might have saved them. The Vrex had been wrong about humans. Wrong about prey in general. Dominance was not the same as strength. The ability to conquer was not the same as the right to rule. These were hard lessons learned in blood on a small blue planet. On Earth, Dr. Jiwan stood at General Minho's grave. She visited every year, bringing flowers that somehow still grew in Earth-scarred soil. The monument was simple, just his name and dates, but everyone knew who he was. The man who killed a warlord. The man who proved humans could make gods bleed. "We survived," she said to the stone. "We're rebuilding. The Vrex leave us alone now. They're afraid of us, I think, or at least they respect us." The wind blew across the memorial grounds, carrying the scent of new growth. Life returning to poisoned Earth. Humanity adapting as they always had. "You asked once if the cost was worth it," Jiwan continued. "I still don't know. We lost so much. We kept our freedom. We proved we couldn't be broken. Maybe that's enough." She placed the flowers and walked away, past rows of graves that stretched to the horizon. In orbit, Earth's defense fleet patrolled the system. New ships, built with lessons learned from the war. They were named after the fallen. The Sun Ho-class carriers, the Yuna-class destroyers, the Bowman-class corvettes, the Minho-class battleships. Each vessel a reminder of those who had died to keep humanity free. Captain Ji-hai commanded one of the new battleships. She was 36 now, had served in the fleet since the war ended. She looked at Earth below, green and blue returning to scarred continents. Beautiful and broken and healing. "All stations, this is the captain," she said over the ship's intercom. "We're beginning our patrol sweep. Stay sharp. The Vrex treaty holds, but treaties are just words. What keeps us safe is strength. What keeps us free is the memory of those who died for it." She thought of her father dead in the war's first month. Her mother, Admiral Hyejin, who had lived to see peace before cancer, took her 5 years later. All the people who had fought and bled and died. They thought themselves unstoppable. Ji-hai said quietly, looking at the stars. "But we made them bleed. And the galaxy will never forget." Far across space on worlds the Vrex had conquered long ago, oppressed species looked at the stars and whispered stories about humans. About the prey that fought back. About the small creatures who made giants bleed. About a species that refused to be conquered no matter the cost. The stories spread. Rebellion sparked. Empires trembled, and on Earth humanity built and grew and remembered. They had paid for their freedom in blood, 8 billion lives worth of blood. They would not waste that sacrifice. They would not forget the lesson they had taught the galaxy. Some species kneel. Some species run. But humans stand and fight even when fighting means death. Especially when fighting means death. The Vrex had learned this truth the hard way. Other species were learning it now. And across the galaxy, The balance of power was shifting, one rebellion at a time, all because a small blue planet had refused to surrender. Earth endured, humanity survived, and the unstoppable had learned to fear.